Sunrise over the ocean. What a spectacular sight.
Hi, I'm Randy Elstrad. A few years ago, my wife and I stayed on the Gulf Coast, and we rose early one morning because we wanted to watch the sunrise over the water. Well, there's actually something very untrue about what I just told you. We did not watch the sunrise. We watched the earth turn. You see, we watched as the slow movement of the earth brought the stationary sun into our view. Well, sunrise is a whole lot more romantic. We do that a lot, don't we? We say things that we really don't mean to be taken literally. Such things as sunrise, or I have a frog in my throat, or I'm going to run to the store. When we say these things, we expect our hearers to understand this metaphorically. It's not an exact truth. It represents something. God uses metaphors as well. He said once that smoke pours from his nostrils. He also said fire comes from his mouth. Well, these aren't literal things. These are metaphors that he expects us to understand that way. Here's another metaphor God used. He said he fought and destroyed a seven-headed dragon sometime in the distant past. Wow, what a metaphor that is. But what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at this incredible dragon story and this dragon who is known by two names in the Old Testament, Rahab and Leviathan.
The imagery for the Rahab Leviathan beast was borrowed from ancient Babylonian culture. The Babylonian story said that the creator god, Marduk, was busy making an orderly universe when a seven-headed dragon named Tiamat rose up out of the oceans of chaos and confusion and challenged the creator. Marduk then slew the dragon and carried on with his work of creating an orderly universe. Several authors of the Old Testament credited these events to the God of the Bible. This creature was mentioned at least 9 times in the Old Testament. Although these authors were using the dragon as a metaphor, they clearly believed that an event occurred that could be likened to the slaying of a multi-headed dragon. As is the case with many metaphors, the Creator's battle with this beast may have multiple meanings. The first meaning, recognized by scholars, is that the beast represents Satan. We know from Jesus' sayings and from the book of Revelations that God did drive Satan out of heaven. So this is a reasonable way to understand this metaphor. The second meaning, recognized by scholars, is that the beast represents Pharaoh's army as they pursued the Israelites through the Red Sea. At least 2 passages seem to suggest this. But there are elements to this dragon story that neither fit Satan nor the ancient army of Egypt. Let's take a look at these passages. Psalms 74:12-13a tells us this: "But God is my King from long ago. He brings salvation on the earth. It was you who split open the sea by your power." Now, this could be a reference to the parting of the Red Sea to allow the Israelites to pass through, but there is clearly another meaning. Listen to what is said in verse 15. "It was you who opened up the springs and streams and dried up the ever-flowing rivers." God is describing here geophysical events in the earth. The open springs, the dried up rivers describe changes to the earth's surface as a result of the great flood. With this in mind, we can surmise that the splitting of the sea in verse 13 is speaking of the separation of the waters above from the waters below during the creation of the earth. Look at verse 16 through 17. It says, "The day is yours, yours also the night. You established the sun and the moon. It was you who set all the boundaries of the earth. You made both summer and winter." Clearly, this passage from verse 12 through verse 17 is giving us a non-chronological history of the earth from its creation to the flood. Now, however, look at verse 13b through verse 14. It says, "You broke the heads of the monster in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave it as food to the creatures of the desert." Now, does a reference to the destruction of the multi-headed dragon really fit into the center of a discussion about the geophysical history of the earth? No, certainly not if the dragon represents Satan. Neither does it make sense if the dragon represents the army of Egypt. But there it is. So, the dragon clearly represents some third entity that was destroyed by natural causes, not by supernatural intervention as were Satan and the Egyptian army. To find out what this third entity was, let's look at Job chapter 26 verses 7 through 11. It says this, "He spreads out the northern skies over empty space. He suspends the earth over nothing. He wraps up the waters in his clouds, yet the clouds do not burst under their weight. He covers the face of the full moon, spreading his clouds over it. He marks out the horizon on the face of the waters for a boundary between light and darkness. The pillars of the heavens quake against his rebuke." This is a very poetic description of the forces of nature. But look at verse 12. It says this, "By his power he churned up the sea. By his wisdom he cut Rahab to pieces." Again, we find the description of the dragon amidst a discussion about natural earthly occurrences. It seems that the third identity of the dragon is some entity that could have been destroyed by natural geophysical causes. Perhaps the third entity of the multi-headed dragon is revealed to us right here in verse 13. It says this, "By his breath," that is, by God's breath, "the skies became fair. His hand," God's hand, "pierced the gliding serpent." Now, who was this gliding serpent, and why were the skies cleansed by his destruction? The word translated as serpent here is the Hebrew word nokash. You may recall from the first video that the word nokash means reptile. So this passage is referring to a flying reptile that was destroyed, and his destruction provided a cleansing to the skies. Was there ever such a flying reptile that terrorized the skies? Yes, there were many. They are called pterosaurs. The pterosaur group is just one member of a vast collection of animals we call the non-belly walking reptiles. This includes the flying pterosaurs, the ocean-dwelling mosasaurs, and ichthyosaurs, and of course, the two-legged and four-legged dinosaurs. According to the fossil record, these non-belly walking reptiles were far more prominent on the earth than their belly walking cousins, yet they have all vanished. The dividing line between the reptiles that survived and the reptiles that perished is their mode of locomotion. The non-belly walkers all perished. Only the belly-walking reptiles, with their mouths suspended over the dust, survived. This is exactly what the Creator described in the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis. Now, we understand that the Rahab Leviathan beast does represent a third entity, and that third entity is none other than the non-belly walking reptiles. Neither Satan nor the Egyptian army were destroyed by natural geophysical causes. Only the reptiles fit this description. Scientists tell us the cause of their extinction were such things as climate change, seismic activity, volcanic activity, asteroid strikes, and even disease.
The next and final video in this Signet Theory series holds the most incredible revelations of all. You don't want to miss it.